child, like every child, curious. He has unlimited imagination, having questions, asking too many questions. A child, like every child, with the potential to change the world. But this child, he was going to change the world. That child's name is Albert Einstein. This is the Einstein we all know. Wise old man, a genius with extraordinary intelligence. It's like there was no one before. It's as if he appeared suddenly. But he, too, was a child once. And like every human being, he had a childhood that shaped him, a past, a story that made him who he was. The story of this child begins on March 14, 1879. He was born in a small city called Ulm in Germany. He was born as the first child of a Jewish family named Pauline and Hermann Einstein, at a time when German Jews had just gained the right to own land, receive higher education, and engage in different professions. Albert actually had a very happy childhood with his sister Maya, who was born later. His mother, Pauline, was especially a very strong, courageous, and very intelligent woman. We can say that Albert resembles his mother at this point. Her husband, a mattress salesman, encouraged Hermann to find new business opportunities. His father, Hermann, was a man interested in the new technologies of the period and science. The first gift that piqued Albert's curiosity was given by his father. A compass, yes, a simple compass. He was 4 or 5 years old. The needle of the compass he held in his hand pointed to a fixed place, no matter where he turned. Albert was shocked by this centuries-old simple technology. He later explains it like this: "Until then, I believed that in order to move something, you had to touch it. But at that moment, I realized that there was a much deeper power behind the functioning of the world." Meanwhile, at the age of 10, Albert had already started to improve himself. He was reading Euclid and sleeping with a geometry book, which he later said changed his life and called it a holy book. He was devouring all the popular science books he could find. Contrary to popular belief, he was a child who never got bored of working or studying. There was only one thing he hated: school. In particular, the rigid, non-creative system that reflected the despotism of German society and culture at that time was literally suffocating him. When he reached high school, he had another obstacle. The time to join the German army was approaching. Meanwhile, in 1894, Hermann Einstein made a radical decision to move his factory to Pavia, Italy, and take his family with him due to the ever-increasing competition. But except Albert, he stayed in Munich to finish his school. But as we said, he didn't like school. He was constantly having problems with his teachers and school administration. One day, he will have had enough of it and he goes to the doctor. With the diagnosis of extreme fatigue and burnout, he was taking indefinite leave and leaving school never to return. And he was going to join his family in Italy. At the age of 15, Albert made a radical decision and left school and ran away. He told his family, "Don't worry, I have no intention of being a vagrant. I have a plan," he said. His plan was this: somehow he would graduate from high school and be eligible to take the Swiss Polytechnic University exam. Of course, he had some time for this, and in the meantime, he had the opportunity to have some fun at his family home in Pavia. But according to what his sister Maya's friends told us, Our introvert Albert's greatest pleasure was riding around on his bike and dreaming. Having escaped from school, which bored him, he was also trying to play with electricity in his father's factory and understand this power better. In fact, according to many names, this was the most important time that made Albert Einstein. The laboratory at the factory had become a great playground for him. In other words, Albert, the great theoretical physicist we have seen, had his share of practice in his time, but there was a problem. Albert was still a high school dropout who didn't even have a high school diploma. In fact, he didn't even have a nationality. Yes, he renounced his German citizenship to avoid military service. And when he failed the art section of the exam he took for the Swiss Polytechnic, he didn't have much choice. His father gave him a place in Aarau, Switzerland. But this would be a very important turning point for him. This school was nothing like the system in Germany. Here, with a wonderful physics laboratory, he found just the fun and intellectual freedom he wanted, along with traditional education. This is where he would enjoy being a scientist. He would connect compass needles to batteries in the laboratory, see with his own eyes how electric current creates a magnetic field, and that both forces are actually different forms of the same force. Because he had to see it for himself. He couldn't believe it without seeing it. He would buy a magnet and see how the iron powders formed patterns. When he learned that light was actually an electromagnetic wave moving in space, he would find the purpose of his life. Yes, the first of the famous thought experiments that haunted Albert when he was still a teenager would appear at this time. Riding on a light wave, yes, Albert's thought experiments. The ability to solve even the most complex phenomena by simplifying them and turning them into a game. Here too, he asked a very simple question. If light is a wave, in that case, no matter how fast it goes, you could capture the crests or valleys of this wave. In this situation, if we could ride this wave, what would we see? What would happen? Would the light remain constant? Would time remain constant or not? Could he ride on the crest of the same wave forever? And would this seem like a moment to us? Of course, these were difficult questions for a 16-year-old boy who had just finished high school, but once he set his mind to it. After finishing school, Albert enrolled in the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology, one of the best institutes in Europe, so that he could receive the best education in this school, which has one of the best laboratories in the world. But what was needed? Yes, attending classes regularly. As we said, it was as if he was allergic to school. That's why he would spend hours and chat with his friends in his favorite places in Zurich, especially in Zurich's famous cafe Odeon Cafe, which has been preserved in the same way and continues to serve even today. Two of these friends in particular were his best friends. It would happen. Marcel Grossman and Michele Besso. There was also a woman among them, a woman who attracted Albert's attention at first sight. Mileva Maric, who came from Hungary alone to the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology, one of the rare universities in Europe where women are accepted. Mileva Maric, who has always been a very intelligent student, was somehow encouraged by her teachers to continue her education. They encouraged him to do it. She first studied as the only girl in schools where there were only boys. And eventually, with the support of one of her teachers, she was able to come to Zurich. One of the first courses she enrolled in here was the physics course, which Albert also took. Mileva was an incredibly self-confident, very intelligent and free-spirited girl. This also caught Albert's attention. He was very impressed by a woman who was freer than him, a woman who stands on her own feet without needing anyone. Letters between them also begin to emerge during this period. Albert expresses all his admiration for Mileva in his letters. He becomes a more romantic man than ever before. Meanwhile, thanks to the notes of Marcel Grossman, who is very good at mathematics, he can prepare for the exams. But of course he has to go to school from time to time. Even when he rarely goes, he gets into trouble with his teachers and the administration. March 1899. When you look at his transcript, it turns out that he received disciplinary punishment for insubordination, Likewise, he gets a very low grade of 6 in the electrotechnical laboratory course. While he has no problems in the courses he wants, he literally ignores the others. Because of this arrogance, he gets into a verbal argument with Professor Heinrich Weber, the director of the physics department. Weber says to Albert, "Very much. You are a very smart kid, but you have a big problem. You don't listen to anyone." Albert, of course, does not lower the sails again. "What am I going to listen to?" he said. According to Professor Weber, physics studies ended 70 years ago. There's nothing left to discover anymore. He doesn't even listen when I present my own ideas. What was I going to listen to? He was going to say... The ideas he was talking about were again questions and experiments about light. His thought experiment about riding a light wave showed him that very strange things could happen at the speed of light. Especially, all the great names before him believed that if light was moving, it must move within a thing, just like the waves in a lake. What was that thing? What vibration, what wave was light? 19. The subject on which 20th century physics almost agreed was that this thing was a substance called ether. This ether substance was something that covered every corner of space, controlled and organized light. Under normal conditions, it is easy to measure speed and movement. You calculate the speed of a car or a ship based on something. A car traveling at 100 speed is traveling at 100 speed for someone stopped. For a car that goes 20 miles per hour, it's like 80 miles per hour. Was the light like this? Captive matter? Did it have a certain speed when referenced? Was it possible to subtract or add one speed from another? Many researchers have tried to measure the speed of light in ether, seeing the world as a laboratory. As the Earth rotated, it moved within the ether matter. This created a kind of wind in the ether matter. Naturally, there had to be a difference between light moving in the direction of the wind and light moving in the opposite direction. However, all efforts to find such a difference in the speed of light were in vain. No matter what they do, the speed of light was constant, in every direction. While the world of physics was not yet ready, Albert had already eliminated the ether in his mind. Such an item should not exist. Light was independent of all the laws of motion that govern the world. An exception. However, Albert had just graduated in 1900 and was not in a position to prove it. On the other hand, his dreams of working at the university were interrupted by Prof. He had already fallen into trouble due to the conflict he had with Weber. On the other hand, his father's business was not going well, and Albert urgently needed a job. During this period, he sent countless letters to all the institutes and universities he could find. There was no professor left that he could not reach. Even his father got involved. He also wrote letters to several universities for his son. But Albert was left in the middle. No institute or university had accepted him. Universities were rejecting Albert Einstein. As if this was not enough, Albert's romantic affairs were not going well either. His entire family, especially his mother, were not happy with Albert marrying Mileva. According to her mother, Mileva was a very independent girl. He looked up from those books and said, "She can't cook for you. She can't sew your socks. She can't take care of a child." As you can see, things had come to the point. By the way, Mileva wasn't very good at her studies either. She couldn't pass her exams. When his mother asked Albert sarcastically, "What will happen to your beloved Mileva?" he replied, "What will happen?" "Of course, my only wife," he replied. At this time, Albert invited Mileva to a romantic holiday by Lake Como. This holiday would not end well, especially for Mileva. Yes, Mileva was pregnant. She could not finish her schooling. Albert was unemployed, and his family was against this marriage. When Mileva failed her final exams, she would leave school and return to her family in Hungary to give birth to the child. In 1902, a daughter named Liesl was born. Liesl, about whom little is known, was already very unlucky in every sense. It is understood from his letters that Albert especially wanted to give up the child, because at this time, with the help of his friend Marcel, he was able to find a job in Bern and started working at the patent office. and he did not want to lose this job, which he found difficult because of a scandal. Around this time, the baby fell ill, and there is no record in history about Liesel. According to some sources, Liesel was dead. Albert had never seen his daughter. Around this time, her father also became very ill and died on the same day after giving Albert permission to marry on his deathbed. What happened to Albert after these dramatic events? It's safe to say that nothing much happened. It was perhaps Albert's weakest point, feelings. He always talked about how he shouldn't let his emotions affect him at every opportunity. The death of a child he never saw, the death of his father, yes, it wouldn't affect her much. This attitude and character was not actually good news for Mileva either, because, although they were happy for a while when they got married in 1903, Albert was obsessed with both his work and the physics problems in his mind. The woman whose intelligence and self-confidence he admired would always remain behind in taking care of himself, their home, and their second child, son Hans Albert, who would be born in 1904. But of course everything was fine for Albert, a job, he had a family, and now he could deal with the physics, problems he was really interested in. Strangely enough, Albert also liked the boring job at the patent office. It provided him with the calmness necessary to solve his problems. There was no pressure on him. However, he and his friends founded a club called Olympia Academy. Among them was his close friend Michele Besso, and they were taking nature walks in Bern with their club friends and discussing physics and philosophy of science. The year 1905 had come. That year, Annus Mirabilis, miraculous year. Albert was now sure of one thing. The speed of light was constant no matter what. It wouldn't change. So no matter where you stood, no matter what speed you measured, it had to be constant. What was called speed was the measure of the distance traveled in a certain unit of time. In this situation, if the speed of light is constant, nothing else could be fixed. The light was starting to come on now, that light that will illuminate the world. It was slowly shining in Albert's mind. The question was simple: what if time is not constant? That's a simple question. There are things that no one even dares to think about. There are things that have been accepted as true for thousands of years. He does not question. Everyone accepts. It was questioning something like this. Because 100, for everyone, for thousands of years, time was constant, unchangeable, the constantly beating heart of the universe. He asked this question again during a nature walk with Michele Besso. He asked for Besso's help. This is called asking for help, because Albert was always talking. Then, without finishing his sentence, he ran home, amidst Besso's astonished looks. The next morning, he came to Besso and said, "Thank you very much. I found the answer to the problem," Albert once said. "It feels like I'm the only one asking these questions. It's like I'm the only one trying to find the answers, like a child's silly questions. But I guess it's because I never stopped being a child. I've always had a childlike curiosity. I always tried to ask the simplest but most important questions. I'm still asking, could God have created the universe any other way? If I were God, how would I create it? Yes." Albert was trying to learn God's way of thinking, and sometimes he could do that. By opening a tiny window, he was able to read God's mind, even if it was just one line. Albert, a child, and actually his story, not the answers he gave, the story of the questions he asked. And his story will continue. And as always, until we meet again, so glad to have you. With love,